suppose there's a bit of, talk out there that Mercola's been bagging the carnivore diet for a whole lot of reasons. So he's sort of arguing the calcium deficiency issue and, you know, carrying on about uh, that meat-based diets or a carnivore diet will pretty much cause people like us a calcium, deficiency problem and all that. I mean, most people know that Mercola no longer follows sort of a keto sort of lifestyle. So he's sort of jettisoned that, and he sort of jumped down the rabbit hole of the repeat crackpots and lost himself. So he's pretty much now coming out with a lot of pseudo nonsense that's not even based on any credible research, because it doesn't exist. It's just there's some associated stuff. I mean, it's out there. I mean, the veganerized community, and some in the vegetarian community, and some in the sort of general nutritional space have sort of argued that you need a balanced diet and all this sort of nonsense, and they criticize for a whole lot of reasons. But even they, like the sort of nutritionist, wouldn't actually come out with an argument saying that the carnivore diet is deficient in calcium. But Mercola, is an exception to that rule, and a few others like him, unfortunately. Now, there are people with pastoral genes, and I've talked about that in the past, and, I'll stick the video at the end of this video. I'll stick a link to that video, which has to do with the calcium genes and how they can actually affect your blood sugar levels, but also can actually affect the sort of the rate of uptake of calcium from the gut. I mean, it's similar to what, obviously ancestral populations don't have these problems. These are the consequences of different lifestyles of people of civilization. So you've got, for instance, people with that consumed a lot of cod liver oil, or cod liver, in places like Ireland, the Hebrides, Iceland, and a few other places in Scandinavia, and tend to have a downregulation of carotenoid conversion. So they tend to require more retinol than the rest of us, as an example. So I have a slight reduction. I've got, I think it's a 32% reduction. So I do need to have a bit more retinol in my diet from animal foods, which isn't difficult to get. It's really easy. I mean, eggs are a very good source, and there's and even in general meat, if you eat enough, you should get enough for your general needs. It's only when you do something inappropriate or whatever, you may throw things out of balance, but that's not the purpose of this video. So we'll stick to what we're talking about. Now, if those people have that, I sort of cover that they can consume, because they have pastoral genes, they can consume dairy, they can consume sardines and things like that to get enough. But the other thing is that sometimes we forget, which is also a critical thing, which even people, and it was only in the paleo days, as I've said before, when I wasn't eating enough meat, that I was actually, or supplementing taurine, that I actually was having heart arrhythmias when I was low on calcium due to the paleo diet. It's after, once I got back onto the low carb diet and I put the dairy back and all that, that issue went away completely. But I've done a bit of experiments since then, and I've actually noticed that when I supplement taurine, I can actually go calcium free, like dairy free for a while, and I don't get the problem. So I've sort of realised, and I've actually looked at some of the research. That's for a future video. But one thing that's critical is that if you eat enough meat, you should synthesize enough taurine from methionine and cysteine. plus you should get a certain amount in the actual, especially if it's freshly slaughtered or it's seafood. In particular, seafood is very high in taurine in the free form. And that actually has, like taurine I've talked about in the past, about a whole lot of how it regulates as an osmolyte, every single mineral in the body. But also when it comes specifically to calcium, since this is the sort of focus that Mercola has in fixation, which is that repeat nonsense, that taurine modulates, and this is important, modulates free calcium concentrations inside the cell. And also in the bloodstream, it regulates the ions there. You'll probably get a video not in the too distant future that Bart will be making about electroneutrality, and really even taurine plays a role here in the way it actually moves through the channels, the ion channels, the way it actually moves ions between the intra and extracellular fluids, so inside the cell and outside the cell in the bloodstream, and actually maintains that correct ionic sort of state. And it seems to have also that effect of there is some research out there that sort of indicates that it actually seems to play that sort of role, which you could say the homeostasis of minerals that has a sort of like at the ions channels, like a sort of plays like a role similar to maintaining sort of an electroneutrality in the body. Hasn't been clearly elucidated or explained, but there is a bit of research there. So it's interesting. And it is an osmolyte. There are a number of other osmolytes in the body. Taurine isn't the only one, but it seems to be one that plays a critical role with calcium homeostasis. And it's something that a carnivore will get. You eat more meat, you'll get more methionine and cysteine, which are the sort of the key amino acids that are required for and actually when you take choline as well, which is another an important molecule that comes in animal foods, choline spares, will convert homocysteines, not only spares folate, B12 and riboflavin for other processes, but also spares, in a sense, in that process, it allows not only to methylate back homocysteine to methionine, but also, any sort of additional molecules from there can actually go into being converted into, because with more methionine and more cysteine that is actually kept in the system, you end up being able to produce more glutathione, more taurine. So there is that other element, because a lot of these, we're talking about these systems are like Swiss Army knives, they have the ability to do a lot of things. So if you give them sufficient and you have the ability to reduce the usage of certain things in certain areas, that means it leaves more B12 as well. And B12 is important for the brain. It's important for bone growth and maintaining good, strong bones into old age, as is taurine, because it amplifies the effects of mTOR in the bones and maintains bone, mineral density, and by regulating all the minerals as well. So that's an important thing. This is why the RDIs for us don't apply. The RDIs apply for people that are on a veganurized or plant-based or heavily, sort of sad diet with a lot of plants, which is nearly 70+% nowadays. And obviously these people are not getting enough methionine, they're not getting enough cysteine, they're definitely not getting in the processed form that they're having their meats, they're not getting very little, if any, taurine. So obviously these people are not going to have the same effects in regulating their minerals in a lot of these sort of things, and may need actually more. And so the RDIs may make sense for those sort of people. Also, they tend to be far more in dealing or clearing out, in a sense, the toxic sort of load that the modern diet produces. Tends to actually use more because you've got phase one of detoxification that requires amino acids. So if you've got a very toxic diet and toxic lifestyle, you can even you have to force more of those into those sort of roles than into protein synthesis or maintenance of bones, because bones are mineralized collagen after all. So there's a lot of these things do not apply to us, is what I'm trying to say. It's very reductionist to see, oh, this pathway does that and whatever. Well, hold on, Mercola. That may be the case in a sad dieter. You may see an association in a sad dieter, but that we don't notice in carnivores. We don't notice it in tribal people that eat meat. We don't notice it, meat only. And I'm not talking about the Maasai here that also consume milk, but I'm talking about other tribal people that do not consume any dairy whatsoever and don't seem to have any of these problems. The Inuit as well. So generally speaking, my belief is that the body's smart. It's evolved on its species appropriate diet, which is largely one that is super hyper carnivore. And, the body, once it gets the nutrients that it requires, it knows how to regulate itself. It's, been doing it for a very long time. And the thing is, if you can regulate your ions as well with taurine, it also means that even that low calcium that can affect blood sugar or can affect arrhythmias or whatever else, even that gets sorted out because you've got the taurine that actually sorts all that sort of stuff out and, has that positive effect. The other thing is that, why you don't want to have a low protein diet or a low animal based diet is that you're going to be neglecting, you're going to be denying your body taurine that plays important roles in the brain by producing new stem cells in the brain. It also has the ability for protein folding. We know longevity is associated with poor protein folding and deranged proteins. Taurine plays an important role in preventing misfolded proteins and maintaining protein folding. It also has sort of an ability to go and clean up some of the mess in order to achieve that protein folding. It does it with amyloid and a number of other things in the body. So that I've covered that in some other videos that some people have seen. There will be more information on that in the future. Also, in the future, we'll be doing a video on entropy, like disorder in organic systems and how taurine inhibits or slows down entropy, which is really important if you want to basically live longer. And you're not going to get it from plant foods. You're going to only get it from animal foods, both the precursors that you need to either to synthesize it or in the free form that is in this tissue of animals. So, I mean, it's just so nonsensical, these whole arguments. And the thing is, when it comes to calcium, I mean, Anthony did a video recently, and he covers that about the lack of calcium, and he did mention taurine, which was nice. He realised the importance of taurine, and it's the lack of taurine in the cat food, in the Pottinger's cat thing, that actually caused them sort of calcium derangements and loss of bone density. Because the thing is, while it's regulating, the sort of maintaining that sort of proper regulation of the turnover of collagen, and also regulating it, and also regulating the minerals that are going to combine into what we call bone mineralized collagen. It also has sort of profound effects on some of those bone growth pathways, even more than, like in muscle, it does help a bit protein synthesis, but not as much as bones. In bones, it seems to amplify, it seems to bind to the mTOR receptor and amplify the effects of leucine in terms of facilitating protein synthesis. So I've seen that with Dad. Dad's nearly 90. He got hit by a four-wheel drive, or what the Americans call SUV, while crossing the road, while he was walking, and knocked a couple of meters down the road, about 3 odd. That's what people said they saw. I wasn't there when it happened. But the thing is, he's nearly 90. He'll be 90 in January. That was about last year that it happened. And not even a fracture, not even a broken bone. Shows quite clearly the high taurine, the high, eating more meat, and has really given him stronger bones, which are way better than what they were in the past. It's also reduced his calcium levels in soft tissue, which is another important. That's why his kidney cancer is reduced quite a bit, halved, sort of what they said. They weren't very clear. They said it's halved, but they didn't explain by how much exactly. And the other thing is this: when they did the last test, they also saw his kidneys are slightly grower, had grown a bit. Again, we know that vegans and vegetarians suffer atrophy. Kidney atrophy is very high in that community. Why wouldn't it be? And also in modern people, like elderly, we see also a whole lot of kidney atrophy. Again, lack of protein. People need to understand. We are fixated on this. We understand notion in the wrong way, protein. We talk about protein as if protein that comes into our body goes all to become synthesized. No, it doesn't. There are two things that we need to keep in mind. One is the absorption. Obviously, there are no protease inhibitors like in plants. So we will get close to 100%, in particular with dairy and with eggs. But with meat, it's just a bit off 90%, a bit off 100%. It's close, but I think about 98. Depends on the meat type and all that. It varies by a bit. It's not much. The amount is still very high, where from plants, it's much lower. We're talking about in the 70-odd% or lower, depending on the plant source or whatever. So the absorption rate is higher. From plants, it's lower. But the other part is the utilization. I've talked about this. Has to do with the composition of the amino acids. Because you've got the essential amino acids, and they have to be in a certain combination for high utilization in protein synthesis. Now you understand why bodybuilders use dairy and eggs, in particular eggs and egg powders, because it has higher utilization for protein synthesis. So, for instance, meat, around about 32%. Eggs, on the other hand, 50%. There's your difference. And when it comes to dairy, certain dairy, it varies a bit, but it's higher than meat, but lower than eggs. So it's another source that they really like for that purpose. Now, on the next point, they will actually argue out there that, TMAO is a nasty. That's what Lustig has been promoting, and pretty much Mercola seems to sympathise with that sort of view. So, again, they just don't understand. I've already done a video covering. I'll put it on at the end somewhere up here or here. There's a couple of them that I've got on TMAO, and then I actually show quite clearly it's heart protective. It lowers blood pressure, so it doesn't cause any of those problems. It's all associated nonsense. Again, like shark attacks and ice cream sales on Miami Beach, So if you eat an ice cream, expect a shark to jump out of the water and bite you on the ass. It's nonsense. It's highly correlated, very highly correlated, even more than TMAO, but still, it's nonsense. It's an association. We need to do experiments to prove causality. Just because something's in the system, now somebody has associated something with something, doesn't mean anything. Absolutely nothing. Now, I've done a video on that. Then they talk about cancer and TMAO, another red herring. Actually, TMAO inhibits tumor growth. So it sort of supports the immune system, which is pyroptosis, I think it's pronounced. And that what that does is that works with the immune system to tell the cell to die, causing cell death, initiating that process. So it does that, but also it upregulates and activates the CD8 T cells, which are the ones that actually kill off cancer cells. So, I mean, how crazy can you be? Why would you want to inhibit a molecule from choline that can actually have that positive effect? Why would you? And even people that have got a genetic thing that I've covered in one of the videos, riboflavin fixes that, like it actually fixes the methylation cycle for people who have got MTHFR. Riboflavin's great, and it's primarily much higher in animal foods again. So the nutrients in animal foods support those enzymatic pathways to work better. So even those issues that some people may have, certain genetic things, even they get resolved with the micronutrients and nutrients that exist in animal foods. It's as if we were adapted to them, some would say. Exactly. So, thousands of years of all these tribal people, eating heaps and heaps of meat, practically no cancer, or they don't even have words for it, or that until they get into the modern era and they start eating our processed garbage. And these people can't understand, how cognitive dissonant do you have to be? This is the problem with academics. This is the problem with academics and doctors who live in their own little world. They need to get out of their offices and actually see that there's plenty of other stuff out there. It's a bit like, Mary Ruddock. She went to Ikaria on one of the Greek islands and realised when she went into the mountains where all the longevity people were, they're all pastoralists, and they're eating organ meats and they're eating all sorts of things. Some seasonal vegetables, but that's about it. But primarily it was dairy, and meat-based, their diet. And it's no different than my great-grandfather that lived for 107, hated vegetables. He just ate basically dairy and meat. So it's like the Maasai. So it's just nonsense, and they lived 100, 20 odd. And I've done a video where, you got young 30 plus year old Maasai warriors talking about their fathers who are now in their hundreds, who basically had them when the father was 70 odd. So say no more. And most people now can't even breed because they're eating so much crap, so much carbohydrate crap, as if our cells are not made of cholesterol, fats, and proteins. And going back to that utilization, what do you think the rest of those amino acids are going to be used? They're going to be used for growing and maintaining your organs. What do you think the organs get? You think protein is only required by the muscles? Your organs also require. If you don't have enough protein, your kidneys are going to atrophy, your heart will atrophy, your ability to detox won't be able to happen, because phase 1 actually requires a number of amino acids to do detoxification. And a whole lot of other organs in the body actually have turnover of cells, and those cells require amino acids to basically build those cellular structures in those organs. So that remainder, which is 68% from meat and 50% from eggs, that remainder is actually going to provide the material to build new proteins or transcript. Your DNA goes through into the endoplasmic reticulum around the actual nucleus and basically transcripts a whole lot of new proteins. And then taurine is there to make sure that they're folded properly. Good boy. Does a good job, So those proteins, those polypeptides, those enzymes that are being transcripted, that are being built, constructed in those factories in the cell, are going to go out there and do a lot of work. And so we need protein to go inside to synthesize that. The immune system, we've got a whole lot of people out there that are crackpots and saying, oh, God, don't eat glutamate, don't eat glutamate. God, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to give yourself cancer. It's the same sort of people. I mean, they're retards, absolutely retards. If you're deficient in glutamate, guess what it does? You'll be deficient in T cells. I don't think that's a smart idea, to be deficient in T cells, the cells that actually go out and kill the cancer cells. Unless you want to die early, especially somebody who's got cancer, I would not protein restrict. On this point, I would argue against. And pretty much, Thomas Seyfried on this is wrong, because he's weakening the immune system. Glutamate is an essential amino acid for the immune system. People say, oh, those awful damn cancer cells, suck up glutamate. They suck up everything, mate. They suck up glucose, they suck up glutamate, they suck up everything. And if they run out of things, then they go metastatic and start spreading into other tissue to find the stuff and grab the stuff. Causing yourself sarcopenia or weakening your immune system, weakening your body and making yourself, frail, isn't going to save you. A strong body is what's going to save you, not a frail body with a whole lot of drugs and radiation. A strong body will keep you protected, and also reducing the deuterium load that actually caused the problem in the first place. And that's carbs, refined carbs, and oils that actually put the high level of deuterium that damaged the mitochondria and actually pushed those cells from senescent into cancer, into a cancerous state of survival. Because too many cells are turned into senescent cells, and they scream like mad, kill me, CD38, kill me, cytokine. That's a cytokine signal to tell the immune system to kill me. I'm a damaged cell, kill me. But if there's too many and you're not eating enough protein, so you're not getting enough to support your immune system, and your immune system is weak, maybe from other contraindicated things like little spiky little fellows that actually can weaken the T cells, and if you do those sort of things, then you're in trouble. You've got a weakened, and that cell will then, rather than actually die, will convert into a nasty cancer cell. And that's what they do. So we need to support our immune system, we need to support our body, and we need to lower the threshold of damage to our mitochondria by lowering the deuterium levels, either through diet, also using metabolic water, or which is deuterium depleted, or getting deuterium depleted water to lower that threshold even faster as a temporary, 1 to 2 or 3 months, bring down the levels really fast, and then use the carnivore high-fat diet to basically provide the sort of fertility material to support the immune system, to support that. Take some taurine supplementation to amplify that effect. Take some choline supplementation to amplify the TMAO effect as well. Take some peptides like TA1 that actually supports stronger immune function. Those sort of things are what we need to do if we get to that stage. The thing is, we don't want to get to that stage, and not to get to that stage is not to follow Mercola or Lustig and to focus on sticking to a species-appropriate diet. Because if you stick to a species-appropriate diet, you'll see your water, how thirsty you are will go down. Because if you've got, and that's important where a lot of people sometimes forget, you've got to get only enough protein, and protein depends on your activity level. That's why I don't use the 1-to-1 anymore. I just say, what's your activity level? So if your activity level is you're a couch potato, it's, you walk a bit and that, like that, 1.8 is more than enough per kilogram of body weight. On the other hand, if you are very active, it could be like a bodybuilder trying to build a lot of tissue, then, 4 grams makes more sense. But you don't want to basically be converting and getting into protein sort of, rabbit starvation. You don't want to be converting that. You want you want that to go into protein synthesis. So you need to basically also, as a bodybuilder, actually eat more fat. And I would say even liquid fat, like cream and stuff, and butter and stuff like that, because that's going to provide the energy. Your body to grow needs to say, I've got energy coming in, I can grow tissue. It's like, for a pregnant woman, I've got food coming in, I can grow a new baby. You're not going to grow tissue, but the problem is what you're growing. Am I pushing insulin up too high with carbohydrates? Or am I putting more leucine in there and pushing up protein synthesis? That's what we want to do. Because that's the other thing these crackpots get all wound up about. Oh, mTOR's going to kill you. And so is IGF-1, that nasty IGF-1 and that nasty mTOR. They just get so wound up about it. It's a killer. It will kill you. Oh, God. Doesn't take much to upset these people, does it? A few crackpot ideas and they start running around like chooks with their heads cut off. Just insane. I usually say to these people, do you have any evidence for that argument? And they look at you like days. Well, everybody says that it's like that. It's everywhere stated like that. And I go, yeah, but that's all associated crap. Have you looked at mechanistic studies to see what exactly signaling happens? And you see this blank sort of face because they haven't. Had they would know. They wouldn't take such a reductionist, such a nonsensical position. They would know that leucine, which is also an amino acid that can actually be turned into a ketone body. They know that leucine can actually directly in the muscle skeletal activate mTOR and cause insulin and IGF-1 signaling in the muscle skeletal tissue. Because that's what it's supposed to do. That's what leucine is supposed to do. Leucine does not activate anywhere else growth. The only place it actually activates growth is in muscle and bone, in the muscle skeletal. That's where it has an affinity. And also, when taurine is in the mix, because on an animal-based diet, you're going to have more taurine, in particular in the bone. It does a bit in the actual in the muscle tissue as well, but in particular in the bone, it will drive bone growth even more in combination with lucid. It has a really good synergistic effect. It actually has an amplifying effect in bone protein synthesis or bone growth. And then you've basically got the signaling effect of, because insulin and IGF-1, if we go back to ancient forms of life, they still exist, more simple organisms. IGF-1 and insulin are one thing. They're inseparable. So they go in lockstep. So when insulin goes up, so does IGF-1. When they go down, they both go down. When you're on a carnivore diet, your insulin, or on a low-carb diet, your insulin to glucagon ratio is 1.3, which means for 1.3 amounts of insulin in the system, there's going to be 1 of glucagon, and glucagon tempers down. It is impossible to have elevated, extremely elevated high levels of IGF-1 or insulin on a carnivore diet, because you wouldn't be able to undertake gluconeogenesis, because you need glucagon to do that. So it's only on a sad diet where insulin to glucagon is like 70-1, like it's completely, glucagon is suppressed. So that's why that whole idea is just nonsensical, completely and utterly nonsensical, It's just pretty much you bleed off more, high carbohydrate diet, you'll bleed off more lactate, and you'll send it to the liver and get it converted. But the thing is, on an animal species based diet, a species appropriate diet, you will only produce based on the demand driven. You may get a bit more. Like if you're exercising, the body doesn't know exactly how much you want and just may produce slightly a bit more. That's why your blood sugar goes slightly up into the 5s when you're exercising quite a bit. But if you're just relaxing and everything's in normal, functioning, nothing's deranged, your blood sugar levels should be around about the 4 plus, very low millimoles, and you're not going to have any funny, strange sort of behaviours of those hormones. Those hormones will signal to the amount that is required for the musculoskeletal structure to undergo the actual to undergo the protein synthesis functions that actually happen. The only thing that actually pushes insulin, IGF-1 and mTOR to higher levels is carbs. Even carbs on their own, completely on their own, which means you're not engaging the Randall cycle, because you're in a very low fat state where you're just having potato. You're not practically on a potato diet. You've practically got no fat. So it's not even a low fat, it's no fat. So on a potato-based diet, you would have an insulin to glucagon of 4. So you have slightly more insulin to glucagon as a ratio, the amount in the system. And still at that, you're in a catabolic state, practically. If you don't eat enough of the potato, you'll be very quickly in a catabolic state. Because it's not too far from the levels of what we call bean catabolism, which is fasting, which is 0.8-1 ratio of insulin to glucagon. So you've got less insulin to glucagon. That's why you're in a quite clear catabolic state in fasting. So even at that level, insulin, mTOR, IGF-1 in the fat cells are still going to be in the system are going to be relatively low, even with things like just pure potato diet. In order to get it to a high amplification, when it becomes a problem, it's when you're on a sad diet and you're pushing these growth pathways in all tissue to very high levels. That's when it's a problem, and that's when you're actually, you've got derangements because you're eating a lot of refined crap in large amounts that are just pushing all these growth pathways. That's where the problem lies. It doesn't lie, and Mercola should know this. And so should Lustig. They should know the research is done on basically sad diet or sick people in hospitals. It's not done on healthy individuals. I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get it how these people that seem to be informed relatively well, how they could actually go from a low-carb thinking to a sort of a repeat or to basically meat is bad sort of a proposition. I don't know whether it's some incentive or just they've lost their marbles for some reason. It just does not make sense to me whatsoever. Because anybody that pulls out books of physiology to see where the signaling is happening and at what level the signaling is happening, those levels, even when you do rodent studies or whatever, will never associate with anything. So it just defies logic. And I've done one on rats where, I mean, it's an animal model, I understand, because you can't induce cancer in people. It's unethical. And they actually induced in the rats cancer. And I've done a video on that. And what did they find? Well, simple. The rats that were given bacon actually improved more than the rats that were given the chow and other stuff, which shows quite clearly that bacon is protective compared to even the regular chow when you induce cancer in a rat. Obviously, we can't do that to humans, and nobody would actually allow that to happen even in a study, unfortunately. But a lot of my subscribers who are far wiser now, a lot of them are either in remission or have very little cancer activity in their body and are much better. They've used some of the biohacks, they've used some of the methods, and they're doing much better in that regard. And other people, as far as cardiovascular health, like me, have actually reversed years of cardiovascular damage and are actually doing much better. And it's really fundamentally, guys, that the problem is that there is so much nonsense out there that's being pushed. And even certain people that seem to be enlightened, I've come to the realization that a lot of them don't really know this stuff or are too lazy to do the research. They've listened to probably some podcasts, they've low carb ones and all that. They go, that sounds pretty plausible. They haven't done their own research. And now new stuff comes out and they've just jumped on another bandwagon. People that have actually looked at detailed stuff, like myself, like Bart, like Anthony Chafee and many others out there, Sean Baker and a lot of other people, they actually realise that this is just nonsense. They know epidemiological nonsense is out there. They understand all the crack pottery that actually exists. And they don't buy that nonsense because they see, even with their own clients, they see with themselves, they see with others, massive improvements, massive turnaround and stuff like that. Obviously there are certain things that may not work as well and sometimes need adjustment. There's some people that have got certain genetics, the old Pottinger's cat, rare diseases that actually emerge because people do contraindicated things over generations, and eventually their children end up with certain genetic anomalies that basically make them unable even to tolerate well even certain animal foods and stuff like that. So it becomes difficult. You have to try and find ways of biohacking their diet to find solutions. But those are rare cases, and those are just no different than the Pottinger's cat situation, where after a couple of generations you were seeing a lot of derangements. And sometimes it's not possible, especially if somebody's grown up, to be able to reverse those, especially when there's zero research in that area of how to silence those genes. It's really hard. I do know that some brain-related genes with phosphatidylserine can actually, in high amounts, can actually silence genes, certain genes. I don't know whether it will work with other genes. I haven't found anything to support something like that. People could try it. Good luck. I hope it works for you. But I can't promise anything. But the reality is, the last thing we need to do is encouraging people to eat a species inappropriate diet to basically perpetuate this catastrophe within the human population. It's bad enough that we've got more and more sick people with every generation. The last thing we need to do is perpetuate that even further. So somebody can sell a product, or somebody can sell or promote their bullshit agenda. The reality is, the N15 data and the carbon and nitrogen data is quite clear. We are hyper super carnivores. We've always been that. It's baked in our bones. For me, that's my foundation. My foundation is that. Anything that comes, I look at it from the prism of that foundation. It's like a physicist would go, experimentally, we know the weak nuclear force exists. We know the strong nuclear force exists. We know these things. We know gravity behaves in this way. We know time dilation behaves in this way. They know all these things. These are experimentally proven. If something comes out as data that says something's different, that's all wrong, they're going to go, well, hold on. I'm not going to just accept it just because a number of people have said. They could be completely wrong. They could be making up shit. They could be seeing fairies, or who knows what. So I'm not going to take that as an argument. I'm going to look at it and go through with a fine-tooth comb, and usually when you do, you realise all the mistakes and how much speculation and you notice maybe and maybe not and all these sort of things, and seems to, another word, all these buzzwords, which basically means is we don't have any idea, but we think it is this that's happening, but we don't really have any solid idea, which basically means they're making shit up to push a narrative which is popular and means it'll get published, they'll get citations, they'll get recognition in academic circles without actually taking a strong yes and no position to expose themselves to a criticism, because they say, well, we need more studies, we need more research. We believe that this is happening, but we can't actually, maybe this is happening, but we can't truly, but everybody else, the media and everybody else, like, all the major news outlets, they'll grab it. They go, oh, look, another study saying this. More and more. And it's just it's the traditional propaganda thing, like as I believe Joseph Goebbels said, as long as you keep on repeating a lie long enough, most people believe it. And that's what's actually happened. And that's the problem in our modern world. We're inundated with nonsense, and most people can't, they just go with the flow. It's too hard to go against the flow. And that's what really happens. And that's what's really hard even for us. And it takes more effort for us to argue against that with solid mechanistic studies, with solid research that's actually been done. But most people will never see it, will never know about it, and in most cases hardly ever gets cited. Very little citations. The media completely ignores it because there's nothing, it doesn't follow the narrative and it's not sensational, so completely ignored. And so in order to get traction out there with people, it's nearly impossible. It's only when people are very sick and the system has failed them and they know it's failed them, that's when they're looking for alternatives. That's when they start searching and looking and sometimes coming across people like me, Bart, Anthony, and many, Sean Baker and many others, and realise that, people like Jonathan, for instance, and then they'll go, oh, there are alternatives. There are other people that have got something a bit more substantial to support what their propositions. And we do, So, I mean, the crackpots and the veganerised community for a long time have tried to dismiss the N15 data. They've worked really hard. They even found some animal, it's an antelope, I think, in southern Africa, which eats a bark tree, and the bark is very high in N15. And they try and argue that it's basically, there you've got a ruminant that's actually got a high N15, but it's eating bark, this specific bark. And we know because of the carbon isotopes that it's eating bark, and it's actually been observed in the wild. So that's their stupid argument. Where for us, we know we're not eating grass. Our ancestors have got high delta carbon, delta 13 carbon, and that means that can only come from a grass source, so it can't come from anything else, so C4 grasses. But we don't have a high N14 to say we ate the grass. We got down there with ruminants and competed to eat the grass. No. We were eating them that were eating the grass. That's why we have that carbon isotope makeup plus the N15, which comes from animal flesh. So that's what we're eating. And it was the highest in the glacial periods. Understandable. It's not much vegetation all the way down to the tropics. You've got still like icing. And in the interglacial periods, we're super carnivores. That means we're consuming anything over 70% is a super carnivore, and we're slightly higher than that most of the season. It's only in the part of the season when there's more fruit around, more honey around, more tubers, which they cook, small little tubers they cooked. They don't eat the fibre, they spit that out. They suck the actual the small amount of glucose. And even the fruit is all berries and small little things. I mean, which are highly fibrous, like the watermelon, rather than being this size, is something that just fits in your palm, very small. The African watermelon, which is what we originally domesticated. So domesticated stuff has nothing to do with what our ancestors consumed, which was completely different. Exactly. But we went for the evil fruit, didn't we? The evil fructose. And we paid for it by being kicked out of paradise. We only got ourselves to blame. So that's my take on the current idiotic thinking of Mercola and idiotic thinking of Lustig. It's without foundation. They seem to have jettisoned any logic. They don't seem to understand how mTOR or IGF-1 or insulin signaling works in the body, because anybody that does understand that would understand that different food and food combinations have a different effect. They seem to have no idea about the Randall cycle either. They don't seem to have any understanding of deuterium either, that can actually have an amplifying effect on the Randall cycle as well. but that's for another day. And I've actually done a video covering a lot of that with Pim. So she'll be bringing out some videos relating to our recent conversations. So I'll leave it for those videos for people to get the additional information. But this is the sort of state that of nutritional research is just the pits. It's poor, extremely poor, and I'm completely dumbfounded how these two would start talking about, calcium deficiencies or things like that in the carnivore space or on the carnivore diet, or talk about TMAO or talk about these sort of things, when anyone that's actually looked, as I said, at the research would realise most of it is just junk, and so it just does not make sense. Anyway, what you should do is you should take this video, because it'll have all the I'll link all the other videos that go into detail, show the studies and show exactly how it works to support the immune system to fight cancer, TMAO, and what their argument about cancer is completely nonsense, and all these other things that we need to put against this nonsense that started to infiltrate, especially the repeat nonsense that's infiltrating our carnivore community. I'll be making more stuff on repeat in the future, as I'll be making more stuff on the veganerized community, exposing their crackpot ideas and also their reductionist nonsense, because it is reductionist nonsense when you really look at it. And you realise that the body is a far more sophisticated, system, and it is a system that has a whole lot of components interplaying. You'll realise that what they're arguing makes no sense whatsoever, because all you need to show is an inverse relationship, something that happens different from what they predict. That's how easy it is to argue against their position, because it's so damn reductionist and, with blinkers on, type narrowly focused, that they cannot see beyond those simple pathways or those simple processes, and they make a whole lot of assumptions out of nothing, ignoring a whole lot of other physiological processes that are taking place, and they see the system like as if they're looking at a static system, because that's what a reductionist does. They look at a system in a very static way, where a person who understands physiology correctly views the system as a dynamic system. Anybody that's recently seen some of the videos or read the research that Bart did on the fluids, the pH in your blood, how that actually, the 4 components that can actually regulate that, will understand that it's a system of components that are actually interplaying with each other to maintain that homeostasis within that tight range, so you don't die. Because the body's not stupid. It's got those mechanisms well worked out. People who are not reductionist, who understand things in a holistic systems way, like Bart, like myself, and like a number of other people that are more sensible, like Jonathan as well, understand that these things are not possible. But people who have got a reductionist mindset and can't escape that narrow focus will never understand this sort of stuff. Thank God they're not engineers working on systems, because they'd ignore most of the safety elements, and those bridges and roads and whatever else would collapse and fall apart because they are so narrowly focused. Well, anyway, that's pretty much it. I've had my little rant and enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. Anyway, see yous.